Welcome to Recap King. In this video, we will explain Shooter. This series tells the story of a retired U.S. Marine Corps sniper living in seclusion and is coaxed back into action after learning of a plot to kill the president. However, will he find a greater danger when he dives back into the world of snipers? Let's find out in Shooter Season 1. Shooter begins by showing a man named Bob Lee Swagger who is stalking animals to be hunted in the forest. Bob accidentally saw a wolf caught in another hunter's trap when he was about to shoot his target. He rushed there to save the wolf because the wolf was a protected animal in the forest. But then, two armed men came and asked him to stay away from the wolf. When Bob refuses, the two hunters attack him. However, Bob could easily take them both down without much effort with his experience as a retired United States Marine Special Forces member. He then returns home, where he lives with his wife, Julie, and their daughter, Mary. A few days later, Bob gets a visit from his old friend and his former superior while still serving in the Marines, a man named Isaac Johnson. Isaac came to ask Bob for his help catching a sniper who had killed a CIA agent from a distance of 1.5 kilometers because while still serving in the Marines, Bob was a legendary sniper scout in the Marine Corps. Isaac then explained that the CIA agent's assassination was just a warning because the sniper left a letter on the victim's body stating that he was targeting the President of the United States as his next assassination target. But before we go any further into the story, we want to thank Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring this video. Happy 3rd birthday Raid Shadow Legends. Many new mind-blowing characters that I found in Raid. Here are my top 3 most badass champions in Raid. Ignatius. He is definitely a badass character because he can apply an HP burn debuff on all enemies. His damage scales off of defense, so he hits hard and is hard to hit back. Always my favorites. My second most badass champion is Norog. This character can help your team because he can lock down the enemy with block active skills on his default attack and AoE block buffs. It's definitely a must-have champion for your team. Last but not least, Turvald, the hardest hitter in the whole game. All of Turvald's skills are about dealing damage, making him great just about everywhere. He's definitely my most satisfying champion ever. So what's new in Raid Shadow Legends? This month, Raid's celebrating its 3-year anniversary, and it's going to be huge. They've got an insane amount of things in store. Raid's kicking things off with free gifts for everyone, then adding in a bunch of new content and events. We're talking new champions, new artifact sets, and a fully personalized video showcasing every player's Raid journey and their own personal achievements. If that's not enough, they've got a full month of special events and tournaments, with some of Raid's best ever prizes on offer, including badass champions, piles and piles of shards, and tons of other goodies. Raid's huge already, and their whole anniversary event makes it an awesome time to join the Raid community. So don't wait around. Now it's your turn to experience the excitement of the Raid Shadow Legends. This is the best time to get started in Raid, and if you're not playing Raid yet, hit my link in the description or scan my QR code here on the screen to get a special huge birthday package worth $40. We're talking 3 free champions at once: Miser Accord, Tiger Soul, Romero, plus 10 Magic XP Brews, 10 Force XP Brews, and 10 Spirit Brews. Wow, that's huge. Remember, the rewards will be available only for the next 30 days and for new players only. And since it's Raid's birthday, the gifts keep coming. All new and existing players can get a bunch of free birthday gifts worth over $25. Once you're in the game after clicking on the links, just enter promo code 3YearsRaid to get your hands on everything. Simple, and it's that easy. Just click the link in the description, and I'll see you in the Raid Shadow Legends. Isaac assumed that there were only a few people in this world capable of shooting from over a kilometer away. One was Bob, and the other was a man named Solotov, Bob's former rival when he was still serving in the Marines. Flashback is shown when Bob and his partner, Donnie Fenn, were still serving in the Marines and were on a mission to capture Solotov. However, because Bob miscalculated everything, Solotov's whereabouts were discovered, so Solotov opened fire at them, killing Donnie and fatally wounding Bob. Since that incident, Bob decided to retire from the Marine Corps and still feels guilty for Donnie's death to this day. Elsewhere, an FBI female agent, Nadine Memphis, is seen on a mission to meet a man from Russia who plans to reveal important information related to the case she is working on. However, as soon as Agent Memphis and her team arrived at the designated location, several agents from Homeland Security suddenly came from the opposite direction and intended to arrest the informant. Because Homeland Security was in charge of the FBI agents, Agent Memphis didn't move at all when DHS agents took over her mission and arrested the informant. Before being taken away, the man had given Agent Memphis a code, but she didn't understand what it meant. The next day, Bob then meets Isaac, where he is introduced to a man named Jack Payne, Isaac's subordinate. Bob, who agreed to help Isaac catch Solotov, was then given an initial brief by Isaac regarding the point where the president appeared during the event, the profile and recent photos of Solotov, and the type of weapon he might use. Bob, who still had a few days before the appointed day arrived, then asked permission to study the location and weapons that Solotov might use and calculate the location and shooting range that Solotov would use to kill his target. After studying everything and making careful observations at the location and at certain points around the location, Bob reported it to Isaac and Payne. Long story short, the appointed day arrived, in which the president's convoy of cars was already seen approaching the location. Bob, who was closely monitoring the crowd, then received a call from Payne informing him that he had not found Solotov at all in the previously calculated location. In a state of panic, Bob then recalculated everything, and it turned out that he had miscalculated Solotov's move. Bob dashed through the crowd as he informed Payne of the possible location of Solotov after recalculation. However, Bob only found a sniper rifle upon arriving at the location and did not find Solotov anywhere. At the same time, Bob hears gunshots, and through the television news broadcast, he learns that the President of the United States has been shot. Suddenly, a policeman appeared who was about to shoot Bob. Bob finally realized that he had been framed by Isaac and Payne, who intended to make him a scapegoat for the shooting incident that had just occurred. Bob managed to dodge the police fire by jumping out the window, but he was finally caught by Agent Memphis, who happened to be nearby. Long story short, Bob was then thrown into prison while awaiting trial after being named a suspect in the shooting case. While in prison, Bob was bullied by other inmates before being rescued by a Russian crime boss named Alex, who happened to be also being held in prison. Alex, who already knew about Bob and the case that put him in prison through the news on television, then thanked him for killing the president of Ukraine, which turned out to be something the Russian people had wanted for a long time. Bob finally learns that the real target is not the president of the United States but the president of Ukraine. Bob then suspects that Isaac and Payne have been playing dirty by cooperating with certain parties to assassinate the president of Ukraine and using him as a scapegoat. On the other hand, Agent Memphis, who joined the team investigating Bob's case, then came to see Bob's wife, Julie, because she had noticed something odd about the case. After interviewing Julie about her husband, Agent Memphis becomes increasingly suspicious that there is something odd about the case and is determined to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, Bob, who was in his cell, was suddenly attacked by several prisoners and guards who wanted to kill him on Payne's orders. Bob can defeat them all and seizes the opportunity to escape from prison disguised as one of the prison guards. Knowing that the police would definitely be on guard at his house and in some of the places he frequented, Bob decided to go to Donnie's mother's house, who greeted him warmly and was willing to help him because she knew Bob was innocent. Meanwhile, Isaac and the police, who know that Bob has managed to escape from prison, rush to find his whereabouts. Isaac deduces Bob may have gone to Donnie's house to ask Donnie's mother for help. However, when he got there, Bob was already in a hurry to ride Donnie's motorbike. That night, Bob, who was spying on his house secretly, then called Julie and told his wife that he would find the mastermind behind the assassination of the president of Ukraine and the person who framed him. Knowing that Agent Memphis and her team had tapped Julie's cell phone, Bob immediately hung up after apologizing to his wife. Elsewhere, Isaac and his team, including Payne, plan to take advantage of Bob's family, as it is the only way to lure Bob out and catch him. When Julie went to the supermarket, she got another call from her husband. However, Agent Memphis and Isaac soon found out and ordered their team to keep an eye on Julie. While on the phone, Julie was suddenly run over by someone who accidentally spilled coffee on her clothes. While going to the toilet to clean the coffee stains on her clothes, Julie met Bob, who was already waiting for her there. Bob then alerted the police, who were about to kill him upon arrival at the shooting scene, and then hurried away before federal agents came to arrest him. Julie then told Agent Memphis about the mercenary cop because she felt that she could be trusted. After investigating further, Agent Memphis was finally able to locate the whereabouts of the mercenary policeman and tried to dig up information from the man. However, her efforts were fruitless and the man left her instead. On the other hand, Payne, who does not want his dirty deeds exposed, then kidnaps the mercenary policeman and kills him. The next day, Bob visits his old friend, a prosthetic bone maker, at a veterans hospital, where he asks for a titanium bone with the same serial number as his own. Although initially refused because Bob is now a fugitive, but the man finally agreed to help Bob and gave him the titanium bone. Long story short, after getting the titanium bone, Bob rushed to a hut in the middle of the forest, where he then prepared several traps to welcome Isaac and his men, who might soon come to catch him. On the other hand, Isaac finally got information about Bob's whereabouts and rushed his team to catch him. Isaac and his team, including Agent Memphis, found Bob nowhere to be found upon arrival. Unbeknownst to them, Bob had set a trap there, where he then shot them from a distance. Isaac then grabbed the nearby weapon and immediately returned Bob's shot, which finally hit Bob's body and made him fall apart. When Isaac and Agent Memphis identified Bob's body, they found a titanium bone with a serial number registered to Bob's name. They also concluded that Bob was depressed over what had happened to him and decided to carry out a suicide bombing. However, not long after that, Agent Memphis, who was in the hut looking for clues, suddenly got a call from Bob, who was still alive, and deliberately manipulated his death to more freely investigate the case and find the mastermind behind all this. A few days later, Payne meets Agent Memphis in her office, where he informs Agent Memphis that a Russian informant previously targeted by her had been killed by the Russian mob. In fact, Payne was the one who killed the man. Hearing this, Agent Memphis even suspects a connection between the Russian man's murder and the shooting case carried out by Bob. Elsewhere, Julie held Bob's funeral, where Donnie's mother was also present. Isaac and his superior, a man named Hugh Meacham, a CIA Black Ops operative, suspect that Donnie's mother has knowledge of the conspiracy they carried out to frame Bob. Therefore, Isaac had no other choice but to get rid of her. The scene then switches and shows the past, where Isaac was still serving in the Marines and got the task of executing a man named Mullah, a terrorist who had committed many murders. However, Meacham, who at that time served as an advisor to Isaac and his team in carrying out the mission, asked him to capture Mullah alive and hand the man over to the CIA because Mullah had important information that was considered to be able to help the United States military to eradicate terrorism. However, one of Isaac's men defected and handed Isaac to Mullah to be executed. When Isaac was about to be killed, Bob and Donnie, serving as a sniper at that time, saved Isaac and killed the terrorists. Because it was considered negligent in carrying out the mission, Isaac was dismissed, and Meacham then offered Isaac to work with him and he would get a higher position. Even though Donnie was credited with saving his life, Isaac was forced to kill his mother because she refused to go and forgot about Bob's case. Meanwhile, Agent Memphis meets Payne, who promises to hand over the files regarding the murder of their Russian informant. But it turns out Payne has a hidden reason, where he deliberately drugged Agent Memphis and kept her in her house. Payne plans to kill Agent Memphis by disguising her death as if she had committed suicide. But suddenly Bob appeared from behind to save Agent Memphis and immediately beat Payne. It turns out that Bob has been keeping an eye on Agent Memphis to make sure that she is trustworthy and not involved with Isaac and Payne's alliance. Unfortunately, Payne manages to escape from Bob's attack and finds out that Bob had faked his death. Now that Payne knows that Bob manipulated his death, Bob then asks Agent Memphis to be his informant to uncover the truth behind the assassination of the Ukrainian president involving him and the conspiracy behind it. After conducting an in-depth investigation, Bob learned that the evidence in the form of bullets found by the CIA at the shooting location had been engineered, so he immediately conducted a reenactment of the incident at the scene, calculated the distance of the shot, and then estimated that the real bullet was stuck in the inside of the police patrol car, which at that time was not far from the shooting point of the president of Ukraine. After conducting further investigation, Bob managed to find the police car, which is now in the garage. Disguised as one of the mechanics there, he checked the inside of the car and found the real bullet. After taking the bullet, Bob immediately left the workshop before his disguise was revealed. Bob then shows the bullet to Agent Memphis, and with the help of her, Bob learns that the bullet is from the Tree of Liberty, a rebel organization that wants a revolution in the United States. Bob rushed to a remote area used as a hideout for the Tree of Liberty organization members. At first they refused Bob's arrival there, but after a man named James Richards, who was the leader of the Tree of Liberty, came to meet Bob and greeted him warmly, their attitude finally changed and they accepted Bob's presence in the organization. Bob then told James about the intent and purpose of coming to the headquarters of the Tree of Liberty while showing the bullet. However, James said that the bullet did not come from their group member. Bob then asked James about the supplier who used to supply the bullets, but James refused to tell him. On the other hand, Isaac, who already knew that Bob was still alive, then tried to track down his whereabouts by going to a car repair shop and heading to the Tree of Liberty's hideout. Isaac came alone to the base of the Tree of Liberty and lurked from a distance, but he was eventually caught and brought before James and Bob. After Bob explains that he is completely unrelated to Isaac, James then orders his men to execute Isaac, which Bob will also do. Because Bob still has concern for Isaac, he deliberately misses his shot to attract the attention of Isaac's men who are on their way there. Sure enough, not long after that, Isaac's men broke into the Tree of Liberty's hideout and made the Tree of Liberty organization members scatter and begin to counterattack. Isaac then tried to escape in the chaos, while Bob tried to fight Isaac's men and managed to save the life of James' brother, who was almost shot by the enemy. So in return, he told Bob about the supplier who supplied the bullet, namely a man named O'Brien. The scene then switches and shows Agent Memphis, who is meeting Bob's wife, Julie, and tells about Payne, who may be involved in a conspiracy that has dragged her husband and made Bob a scapegoat. Agent Memphis then asks Julie to be careful because Payne is getting violent. Hearing this, Julie decided to disclose information about Payne to the media crew who were gathered in front of her house. which she did deliberately to attract public attention and in the hope of limiting Payne's space. Long story short, Payne finally went to Agent Memphis to turn himself in, where he was then interrogated about his involvement in the murder of the Russian informant and also the murder case that dragged Bob. But the real purpose of Payne turning himself in was to clear his name because he thought that Agent Memphis didn't have enough evidence to imprison him. However, Payne gives Agent Memphis 2 clues to crack the case: Meacham and Annex B. Elsewhere, Isaac, who managed to escape from the Tree of Liberty headquarters, then meets Meacham and tells about Payne, who has surrendered to Agent Memphis, where they then ask the military for help to pick up Payne. Not long after, several soldiers came to pick up Payne and informed Agent Memphis that the military would take over the case involving Payne and Payne would be tried militarily for violating the code of ethics. Agent Memphis tried to stop them because she still lacked information about the case she was working on, but they ignored her and took Payne away from there anyway. Meanwhile, in another place, Bob was heading to O'Brien's place, who turned out to be his former shooting instructor. After meeting with O'Brien, Bob immediately told everything that happened and showed the bullet that had killed the president of Ukraine. However, O'Brien tells Bob that the bullet is not a homemade one because it has been refined and will shatter to pieces to eliminate any traces. O'Brien then takes Bob to the top of the hill, where he shows him a sniper rifle called the Black King. O'Brien then confirmed that the shooter was using a Black King rifle, judging by the bullets used and the distance he fired. O'Brien then advised Bob to look for the person who had the Black King rifle if he wanted to find the shooter. O'Brien also says that there are only 4 Black King weapons. Not long after that, O'Brien received information from a friend who informed him that a military car group was heading to his residence. As if he had anticipated this, O'Brien then asked Bob to prepare for the arrival of the mercenaries sent to kill him. Some of them were seriously injured by traps O'Brien had set earlier, while others were knocked out by Bob and O'Brien with long-range rifles. After successfully subverting the entire army, Bob said goodbye to return to continue his investigation. But before leaving, O'Brien then gave his Black King rifle, complete with a box of bullets, to Bob because he considered him to be his best student. Long story short, Payne was released by a man named Lon Scott, the CEO of Anher Dynamics. Payne then asked Lon Scott for some money, saying that Annex B was in his hands. Annex B is information that refers to the massacre of a remote village in Ukraine by the private military armed by Lon Scott's company Anher Dynamics. Because of that, Lon Scott was involved in the shooting of the president of Ukraine. However, Lon Scott refused Payne's request, saying that he did not care about the massacre video even though the video could bring Lon Scott to court on charges of war crimes. On the other hand, Agent Memphis seems to be investigating one of Dmitri's acquaintances, a Russian informant who was killed by Payne, where that person is the only key witness who knows about Annex B after conducting further investigations. Agent Memphis then goes to a woman named Casper to inquire about the informant's whereabouts. Although she had refused to cooperate, Casper finally agreed to connect Agent Memphis with the informant, who turned out to be a woman and was in Russia. Through a video call, the woman then gave all the information about Annex B known to Dmitri, making it the target of many parties, including the Russian military. When they were about to reveal information about the mastermind behind the tragedy of the massacre, suddenly their communication connection was interrupted because the Russian military finally found out the location of the informant woman and killed her right in front of Agent Memphis. Meanwhile, Bob, who was looking for information regarding the Black King weapon, visited an exhibition where the weapon was exhibited to the public, where he finally found out about Lon Scott, who has a Black King weapon and is a reliable sniper who can shoot from a distance of more than 1 kilometer. After getting the desired information, Bob immediately reconnaissance Lon Scott. He also shared information about Lon Scott with Agent Memphis and asked her to come to see him. Bob then reveals about Annex B and Lon Scott's involvement in the assassination of the Ukrainian president to Agent Memphis. After that, Bob and Agent Memphis see Lon Scott having a meeting with Hugh Meacham and a man named Grigory Krukov, a Russian FSB agent who orders Lon Scott and Meacham to kill the president of Ukraine. The purpose of their meeting is to discuss Payne asking for some money as ransom from Annex B, which is now in his hands, in which Meacham and Krukov are also involved in the massacre. However, Krukov refused Payne's request and left the meeting. On the other hand, Bob, who had been stalking and eavesdropping on their conversation, then had the idea of playing them against each other by using Payne as bait. Long story short, Bob and Agent Memphis then meet Krukov to carry out their plan, where Bob offers services to Krukov by asking for the same reward as Payne asked to get Annex B and killing Meacham, Lon Scott and Payne. Krukov didn't necessarily believe Bob because he knew that Bob wasn't that much interested in money. However, Bob convinces Krukov that he needs the money to take his family abroad and start a new life. Elsewhere, Julie intends to secretly leave her sister's house and head for a safer place. After she managed to leave the house with her daughter, two men came to see Julie's sister and claimed to be journalists who had an interview with Julie. However, the two men were Lon Scott's agents who were ordered to kidnap Julie and Bob's daughter. Because they couldn't find Julie there, they secretly tapped Julie's sister's cell phone. Later that night, Bob and Agent Memphis visit Lon Scott's house, where Bob sneaks in while Agent Memphis helps him by distracting the guards. Bob wanted to clarify to Lon Scott that his skill level was way above Lon Scott's, and he could kill Lon Scott anytime he wanted. Bob then gives the recorded evidence of his conversation with Krukov to Lon Scott so that they suspect each other. Before leaving, Bob says that he will shoot Krukov and asks Lon Scott to come while Payne deals with Krukov. In other words, Bob actually wants to challenge Lon Scott to a sniper fight because Bob knows that Lon Scott is very ambitious to beat him. Long story short, the day of the transaction between Payne and Krukov arrived, where Bob was already at his place, as was Agent Memphis. However, Bob sees Isaac hiding in Payne's car, preparing to shoot. Because of this, Bob decided to change the plan, where he would get down and get closer to the location, while Agent Memphis would distract the enemy by shooting at them. They immediately took cover when Agent Memphis fired at them from a distance while Lon Scott prepared to counterattack. But when he found out that the shooter was not Bob but Agent Memphis, Lon Scott chose to leave. On the other hand, Payne, who managed to escape with the ransom, headed to a repair shop where he hid the Annex B flash drive. However, unbeknownst to him, Bob had slipped into the trunk of Payne's car and immediately ambushed him, taking Annex B along with the ransom. Elsewhere, Julie and her daughter are accosted by Lon Scott's henchmen who arrest them and take them hostages. Julie and her daughter were then brought before Lon Scott, who was with Isaac and Payne. Meanwhile, Bob, who found out that his wife and daughter were being held hostage by Lon Scott, then contacted Isaac and asked him to come to a place to meet him in an angry tone. The next day, when Isaac finally came to see Bob, Bob then asked Isaac to barter with Krukov and his gang, namely his family, in exchange for Annex B and ransom. Isaac agreed and told Bob that he would help him solve the problem for Annex B and the ransom. Shortly afterward, Isaac met with Lon Scott and Krukov to discuss the deal Bob wanted, while Bob and Agent Memphis lurked from a distance. Krukov and Lon Scott feel in control of Bob after taking his family hostage and agreeing to a barter deal. After the deal, Bob got a chance to talk to Julie over the phone. With the help of Agent Memphis, Bob can track down his wife and daughter's whereabouts at that time and immediately plan a rescue action for Julie and their daughter. After knowing the location of the whereabouts of his wife and daughter, Bob immediately rushed there. On the other hand, Lon Scott and Krukov already know that Bob is tapping the phone, so they have prepared another plan to get rid of him. Long story short, Bob, Agent Memphis and Isaac finally arrived at the location. While Bob and Isaac charged in, Agent Memphis stood guard outside, scouting the enemy's movements and guiding them. After successfully entering and incapacitating several guards, Bob did not find the whereabouts of his wife and daughter anywhere. Elsewhere, Lon Scott has his Black King gun set, aiming for Bob. Bob managed to outwit Lon Scott with a simple trick and then rushed away from there. Bob and Isaac then rearranged the plan, in which he appears to be modifying something he will use against Lon Scott. After that, he purposely went to Lon Scott at his residence to redo the deal, in which he gave Lon Scott a chance to shoot him while they were bartering, which Lon Scott immediately agreed to. Long story short, Bob finally arrived at the location Lon Scott had determined to barter, while Isaac and Agent Memphis monitored the situation from a distance. Agent Memphis saw two cars stop facing each other as if they were moving something. One car was then seen moving away from the location, while another car approached Bob's location. It turned out that the car was only carrying Payne, who pointed a shotgun at Julie's head, while Bob's daughter was unknown. Lon Scott fired one shot at Bob, but missed. Turns out, when Bob came to Lon Scott's house, he had previously snuck in and tampered with Lon Scott's Black King gun and changed the bullet. When the third shot was fired by Lon Scott, suddenly the rifle exploded after Bob replaced the bullet with a modified bullet. Very badly injured, Lon Scott was eventually killed. Knowing Lon Scott is dead, Isaac shoots Payne's arm off so that Bob can save Julie. After that, Julie kills Payne because he refuses to tell where they took their daughter. Meanwhile, Agent Memphis, who had been following the other car, calls Bob and tells him that Krukov's henchmen took his daughter to the Russian embassy. Hearing this, Bob and his team rushed to work out a plan to rescue Mary, who was detained inside the Russian embassy. Agent Memphis received information that the Russian ambassador was attending a meeting outside the office. Therefore, Julie confronted the Russian ambassador by telling him that her daughter was being detained at the Russian embassy. Isaac, a federal agent, convinced the Russian ambassador that Julie's statement was true and asked the ambassador to return to the Russian embassy office immediately. Meanwhile, Bob will disguise himself as a bodyguard to enter the embassy for the Russian ambassador. Elsewhere, Krukov was approached by a woman named Patricia Gregson, a former national security advisor, who asked him to release Bob's daughter because Krukov's actions were considered too excessive. Krukov initially refused because he thought that Patricia was not his superior. But then, the Russian ambassador called Krukov and asked the same thing in an angry tone. Krukov acted as if nothing had happened and told the ambassador that he would immediately sort things out, which confirmed that the Russian ambassador had absolutely nothing to do with what Krukov and his gang had done. Meanwhile, Bob, who was about to enter the Russian embassy, was prevented from entering by security officers because he could not show his identity card. Seeing this, the Russian ambassador even told him to come in and explain that he was not at all involved with what Krukov was doing and judged that Krukov's actions had gone too far. The Russian ambassador then gave Bob access to find his daughter's whereabouts in the embassy office. Long story short, Bob finally found his daughter and immediately took her away from there. After successfully getting out of the Russian embassy safely, Bob then took his daughter to his wife and asked them to wait at a nearby motel while he would solve the problem. After that, Bob then called Isaac and asked Krukov to sort things out. Krukov accepted the challenge, but he only sent his henchmen to kill Bob while he was headed to the motel where Julie and her daughter were hiding, where Krukov had previously implanted a tracking device in Bob's daughter. Bob is already preparing to eradicate the troops sent by Krukov with the help of Isaac, Agent Memphis, and other FBI agents. Meanwhile, Krukov, who had arrived in front of Julie's motel room, asked her about Annex B. However, Julie did not know about it. Not getting the answer he wanted, Krukov started shooting at Julie's motel room, so Julie rushed to call Bob, telling him that Krukov had come to the motel and threatened them. Bob immediately set up a plan to lure Krukov out of the motel, and after calculating everything, he managed to shoot Krukov from that distance, killing him. However, because Bob is a fugitive who is still a suspect in the assassination of the president of Ukraine, he was immediately arrested by the police. Long story short, Bob and his lawyer and Agent Memphis met Patricia where she offered to free and clear Bob's name in exchange for Annex B, which had to be handed over to her. But Bob said that if Patricia wanted Annex B, then she had to get it from the Russian embassy because he left her there. Because Bob was proven not to be involved in the assassination of the president of Ukraine, he was finally released and his name cleared again. The FBI and the authorities then devised a scenario that stated that Lon Scott had planned and killed the president of Ukraine and did not involve federal agents from the United States or from Russia as actually happened. Bob was finally able to reunite with his family, and that's the end of Shooter Season 1. The moral message that we can learn from this series is that sometimes others can use our talent for their benefit, so we have to know who we can trust to take advantage of our expertise. Never be fooled into entrusting our expertise to the wrong people.